Earnings per share is one of the most popular metrics in investing, and it's a very useful tool for legendary investors such as Peter Lynch and Bill Ackman. In part 1, we'll look at the formula, then earnings per share variations, and lastly its pros and cons. So, what exactly is earnings per share? You may have seen it appearing in earnings headlines, valuation ratios, analyst reports, and market commentary almost daily. Its main objective is to determine the profit a company earns per share of stock that investors own. Working out per share earnings allows investors to compare companies of different sizes on a more level playing field. However, while it is simple in concept, it becomes truly useful only when investors understand how it is calculated, the variations that exist, and its limitations. In the first part, we'll look at how do we calculate earnings per share. The common formula is net income minus preferred dividends divided by weighted average shares outstanding. Every aspect of the formula is important. Let's break down each aspect to understand it better. Net income is the profit of a company after bills, debts, and other fiscal obligations are paid. It's the baseline of every profit summary. We subtract the preferred dividends because earnings per share is meant to show earnings to regular investors only. As we can see, the weighted average shares outstanding is our denominator rather than the closing share count. But why is that? Well, throughout the year, companies often introduce new stocks, repurchase shares, or offer share-based incentives. So, by weighing these totals, we get a much more realistic estimate of the time value of such fluctuations. This formula also includes the stock dividends and splits. This preserves the consistency of earnings per share across different time frames. So, where do investors find earnings per share? You'll find it below a company's income statement. They need to be mentioned within the company's yearly or quarterly reports. Every company must disclose the performance metrics and the total equity utilized. And when the results go public, there are a few factors capture the market's attention. Firstly, a company's baseline earnings, and whether the earnings meets or misses the analyst's expectations. Lastly, there is the forward guidance which focuses on upcoming profits and the company's expectations. Investors don't pay much attention to where earnings have been, but rather they focus more on the trajectory they are taking. Next, we'll use Microsoft as an example to help you understand how to apply the formula. By the way, for Microsoft, the preferred dividends are typically 0, which simplifies the numerator to just net income. If we had preferred dividends, then we would simply subtract it from net income. According to Microsoft's annual report for 2025, the net income was $101.83 billion, and the weighted average diluted shares outstanding were 7.46 billion. Using the figures above, here's the calculation. It's $101 billion divided by 7.46 billion. As a result, Microsoft reported a diluted EPS of $13.64 for the fiscal year 2025, which represented a 15.59% increase over 2024. Part 2. The different types of earnings per share. There are two kinds, basic and diluted earnings per share. Even though we speak of earnings per share as a single value, companies have two versions. Basic EPS means the total profit is distributed across the mean value of common stocks presently on the market. It operates on the premise that no further equity will be presented down the line. As you can see here, the formula is the standard one used for calculating earnings per share. On the other hand, diluted EPS shows a company's earnings per share if all potential sources of new shares such as stock options, warrants, and convertible bonds were exercised. Think of it as the worst case scenario. It prevents companies from looking more profitable than they are because it tells investors that if everyone converts their options, this is your actual profit per share. This version counts a higher number of shareholders, meaning the result will be less than the basic EPS figure. Next, we'll look at the trailing, current, and forward earnings per share variations. If you're learning something, please consider clicking the like button and subscribing so you don't miss my upcoming videos like this one. Another way to calculate EPS is to use different time windows. Each of them has their own systematic motives. Trailing EPS does the analysis backwards. They add up profits from the past year. Since the numbers are on paper, trailing earnings per share is dependable. It's often useful in price-to-earnings ratios, but the downside is that it doesn't show you the changes a business might already be facing. Forward earnings per share are built entirely on expert guesses for the future. These are about potential rather than proven wins. They're great for spotting growth, but it also makes them rather unreliable and is often seen as a best guess rather than a confirmation. Using them all together paves a clearer path. A business would be momentous and durable if it had strong trailing, current, and forward earnings per share. Sometimes earnings per share are disrupted by one-time events that don't reflect how the business operates day to day. To prevent that from happening, you can use adjusted earnings per share to calculate it, which eliminates non-recurring events such as settling a lawsuit, liquidation costs, or reorganization costs. The idea is to assess the sustainability of earnings relative to headline profits. Another helpful metric is earnings per share from ongoing activities. This metric excludes the performance of closed business units or discontinued segments. It comes in handy when businesses undergo a strategic overhaul or are selling off holdings. Why? Well, because it lets those watching the stock isolate the specific revenue stream expected to persist over time. Next, we'll briefly look at a very popular way to use earnings per share, which is by combining it with the price-to-earnings ratio to form the foundation of many investors' analysis. The price-to-earnings ratio shows how much investors are willing to pay for each dollar of earnings. The formula is shown here with the stock price divided by earnings per share. Companies with relatively small earnings per share can trade at higher price-to-earnings ratios if their growth is expected to be higher. Similarly, the stocks with a solid earnings per share but stagnant growth might trade at lower price-to-earnings ratios. This explains why it alone cannot tell you whether an equity is a bargain or pricey. You always have to weigh factors like share price, anticipated growth, and the quality of the business. EPS tracks the profit per share, however it may fail to show the capital intensity required to achieve those gains. Even if two businesses report similar earnings per share, their level of funding and assets can differ greatly. To bridge this gap, investors typically look at it alongside measures such as return on equity or return on invested capital. You can see the formula for return on equity is net income, divided by average shareholders' equity multiplied by 100. A company that delivers a robust EPS while using a small capital base is often seen as efficient and of superior business quality. Earnings per share does not reflect liquidity disbursements, but profitability. The allocation of earnings is decided entirely by the management. They choose between dividend payouts, internal reinvestment, or executing share buybacks. These strategic choices appear on the retained earnings line in net assets. What does this mean for the shareholders? It means that it focuses more on potential value than on definite money returns. In the next part, we'll look at the main pros and cons of earnings per share, starting with the main cons. Firstly, it fails to account for operating cash flow, capital adequacy, or overall investment risk. High earnings per share should never define a stock as being a great investment. Similarly, a negative result can also skew comparisons with cyclical sectors, especially at a higher risk. This is why it should never be studied in isolation. Businesses can influence EPS through their accounting choices or by aggressively engaging in buybacks. This means it can be directly affected by changes in share counts. Fluctuations in the share count directly affect the final calculation. Share repurchases lower the volume of outstanding equity, which can boost EPS even though the net income remains flat. Conversely, issuing new stock has a dilutive effect as it spreads the same profit pool across a larger equity base. Because these buybacks can artificially pump it up without any real change in the commercial fundamentals, stakeholders must determine whether rising earnings per share stems from organic growth or merely clever financial engineering. EPS is a primary driver of many investment analysts' valuation models and performance reviews. However, it's worth noting that the actual value of it stems from contextual analysis. It compares across historical periods with industry peers and against various financial metrics. Earnings per share can be a robust diagnostic tool if used correctly, but it can also be deceptive if used in isolation. It helps us reveal exactly how much net income is generated per share, but uncovering the underlying drivers of that performance comes from rigorous research rather than speculative guesswork. Please consider liking and subscribing if you found value from the video. You'll find this one very useful to watch next. Thanks for watching and see you there.